Hello there to you, Darren. So NATO has been fighting, hasn't it, for its political and global relevance for some time now. So how much of a blow was this that the US didn't even make it aware of its plans to remove its troops from Germany?
I think it is a significant blow in many regards. Isabel, at the very least discourteous, a sign, I think, of how damaged relations are between Berlin and Washington. It's pretty clear that Angela Merkel has not hidden her disdain for President Trump over the last 3 or 4 years, and he has been more than willing to return that disdain too. But in regards to the wider context that this goes beyond Germany, I think it is potentially damaging to the alliance. We know that Donald Trump has talked about NATO at times in a sense in which he doesn't seem fully committed to the alliance. And there are questions, of course, about what is NATO's relevance now in 2020, where many would suggest that actually the main potential threat to the Western order is actually coming from China now rather than Russia, and whether the North Atlantic Treaty Organization is in the best place to try and deal with that. And that is why we heard from Jens Stoltenberg today, time and time again, talking about how NATO is not just relevant to Europe, but is actually a base in which the United States can project its power to the rest of the world. Let's get the thoughts now of one of my guests who joins me outside the European Parliament here in Brussels, Kristine Berzina. She is a senior fellow at the Alliance for Securing Democracy in GMF's office here in Brussels. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Just first of all, on my point about just how relevant this decision is. I mean, does it really attack the alliance, or is this merely words from President Trump and it's just a bit of a political stunt?
I think that the announcement of the withdrawal and the clear words from President Trump on Monday that he would be interested in withdrawing rather than simply rumors to the fact is alarming. Something that has been an important note here in Europe has been the increase in the American troop presence and the American presence on this continent in order to protect security and also to position the U.S. for broadly in its foreign posture. If we see a drawdown of troops from Germany, there's a question whether that changes. At the same time, the administration has been much better at signaling and announcing withdrawals than following through with them. So and what is clear is that there aren't clear plans yet about how that withdrawal would happen and where those troops might go.
Yes, Stoltenberg very clear to me today that at the moment there is no how and when this may well happen. So is this a slap in the face then primarily for Angela Merkel more than anything else?
I think it's definitely to be understood in the context of posturing between Germany and the United States. And on Monday, too, President Trump was talking about the trade issues at the same time as he was talking about defense and defense spending. So it's really part of his broader look at Germany and what he sees to be the necessary relationship between the U.S. and Germany. Of course, that also reflects on Europe more broadly. And so I think if there is actually a drawdown, it will be very important to see where those troops do go. We also have heard that there won't be a decrease in the European presence, in the American presence in Europe. So would those troops be moved to a different country? There have been talks about a base potentially in Poland earlier, although that has also been a really challenging process. Nearly 10,000 troops, that's a lot. It's a lot of people to move around. And so we'll see. In the absence of that, the Russians are thrilled.
And many, maybe Eastern European countries slightly worried about all of this. But you know what? Many would say this is not simply now about Russia. I was talking there about China. Clearly NATO view it as a strategic threat in many regards. But is it relevant to that cause?
NATO sees the fact that China is a big problem. And they've really been trying to make sure that they are up to date and providing real solutions for questions of China's global posture and more new challenges. So there are challenges in technology and 5G and disinformation, this kind of influence question. Traditionally, this hasn't been the realm for NATO at all. But really, over the past year, we've seen the conversation about China evolve within the alliance tremendously, from something that wasn't a conversation you could have to something that is something that the Secretary General is frequently speaking about, that appears in official documents, and that is here. Part of the reason, as the Sec Gen says, is that China isn't simply over there. This isn't something only about what's happening in the South China Sea. It's about what's happening in Europe, what's happening in our societies. It's about what do you do when the Belt and Road or the 5G projects really start infringing upon what we consider our security and our interests at home. So if China is here, if China is in NATO countries and doing things that we suspect could be affecting the security of NATO countries, well, then NATO has to pay attention to that too.
And just very finally, there's been an awful lot of talk about NATO in the last couple of years. Of course, the French President Emmanuel Macron once described it as brain dead. Donald Trump has said has been pretty lukewarm to the alliance ever since he became president, even beforehand. I mean, are these serious threats to NATO? Is it genuinely having to find a reason for itself, or are we slightly overplaying this and over-egging how difficult it is for NATO?
Any bureaucracy is difficult to move, but I think that there have been lots of kicks in the pants for NATO over the past few years. Emmanuel Macron's criticism of it last fall, was a good way to launch a rethink, and now NATO has launched a reflection process to also try to maintain its relevance and try to figure out the right way to deal with some of our new challenges today. There's no shortage of the things that NATO should be doing and could be doing, and I think it's doing a good job of figuring out how to be there. It's usually slower than most of us would like to see it, but I think it's not oblivious to the role it should be playing today and in the future.
Kristine Berzina, thank you very much indeed for joining us here in Brussels with our 1.5 metre pole away, which gets slightly heavy, Isabel, after a time. There you go. A few kicks in the pants, though, for NATO in the last couple of years. That's certainly notable. It is clear that they are trying to, at the moment, reflect on precisely what the battles are for them in the years to come, not necessarily actual military battles, but where they need to focus their attention, particularly potentially with a slightly more unreliable US partner. And that poses questions for our security here in Europe. Questions too about whether Europe should look to become more of a military force in a sense. A lot of people talked about an EU army as they have done in the past. Jens Stoltenberg told me today that he would welcome Europe investing more in defence, but he sees that any EU army, any EU military capability would not be to replace NATO, but rather to complement it.
No shortages of challenges there, Darren, including that heavy pole. Darren McCaffrey there for us in Brussels.